He lived a quiet life in a small town on the edge of Georgia, where the trees grew thick and the roads stayed empty after dark. The people in town knew little about him, and that was the way he liked it. He wasn't rude or cold. He just preferred silence. He had bought a small house years ago, tucked behind a row of pine trees, with a fence that kept the world out and gave him peace. To the neighbors, he was simply a calm, polite man who minded his own business. Few would have guessed the weight he carried in his past or the discipline that shaped every move he made. He spent his mornings the same way every single day. Before the sun rose, he would wake up, stretch, and start his routine. The smell of coffee filled the kitchen while soft music played from a small radio on the counter. After a few quiet minutes, he stepped outside into the open yard with his dog, a strong, alert Belgian Malinois who never left his side. The dog had a thick golden coat and sharp eyes that seemed to understand everything his owner said. The two of them were partners in every sense of the word. They trusted each other more than anyone else. The man wasn't young anymore, but his body showed no sign of slowing down. Years of strict discipline had left their mark. He still trained every morning, using nothing but his body weight and a few simple tools. Push-ups, pull-ups, sprints, nothing fancy, but everything precise. Every motion looked controlled, measured, as if even his breathing followed a rhythm he had practiced for decades. His dog would follow close by, waiting for a signal to run, to sit, to guard. The bond between them was clear to anyone who watched. It wasn't just a pet and owner relationship. It was loyalty built through shared hardship. What the people in town didn't know was that he had once been part of a group most people only heard about in movies. The kind of soldiers who went where others couldn't, who operated in silence, who lived by codes of secrecy and trust. His years in service had taken him to deserts, jungles, and cities halfway across the world. He had seen things that still woke him up at night, though he never told anyone about them. He didn't wear his past like a badge. There were no military stickers on his truck, no framed medals on his wall. The only reminders were a few old scars and a folded flag tucked in a drawer. He had learned long ago that peace wasn't given. It had to be built, day by day, choice by choice. And for him, that meant keeping his world small, his circle tight, and his mornings predictable. Most people who met him noticed something different about him, though they couldn't always name it. Maybe it was the way he stood, straight, still, aware of everything around him, or the way he spoke, slow, calm, with eyes that seemed to read a person before they even finished their sentence. Some found it intimidating, others found it comforting. Children in the neighborhood liked to wave at him when he walked by with his dog. He always waved back, a small smile on his face. He didn't go out much. Crowds made him uneasy, and loud noises still made his heart beat faster. He preferred long drives on quiet roads where the sound of tires on gravel was the only thing breaking the silence. Sometimes he would stop by the local grocery store, where the same cashier always greeted him with a warm smile. They would chat, briefly about the weather or the local high school game, and that was enough for him. He didn't need long conversations, just small human moments that reminded him he was still part of the world. His dog, though, was the center of his days. Trained from a puppy, the dog understood commands most humans wouldn't catch. A slight hand signal, a whistle, even a shift in tone. That was all it took. The dog responded instantly, never hesitating. Together, they were a team built on trust, and that bond was something sacred to him. When he left the military, he had been warned that adjusting to civilian life would be hard. Many men like him struggled to fit in again. The world moved slower but also felt louder. People didn't understand the discipline, the vigilance, the need to check every corner before entering a room. But he managed. He found a rhythm in the quiet life, and that rhythm became his peace. He often spent his evenings on the porch, sitting in an old wooden chair with the dog resting beside him. The sound of crickets filled the air, and the occasional passing car would remind him that life outside his fence still existed. Sometimes, he would look up at the stars and think about the men he had served with, some gone, some still fighting their own battles back home. He didn't talk about those memories, not even to the people who tried to ask. He just carried them like the invisible weight that came with surviving too much. In the small town, rumors about him came and went. Some said he had been in the Marines. Others said he worked in private security. A few thought he was just a quiet man who loved his dog more than company. He never corrected anyone. The truth, he believed, was something sacred, not because it was secret, but because it was his. He found joy in small things. Fixing an old fence post, washing his truck until the paint shone under the sun, watching his dog chase a ball across the yard. Every day felt simple, but every moment had meaning. He knew how fragile peace could be, and he didn't take it for granted. He had a neighbor, an elderly woman who often brought him pies from her kitchen. She said she liked having someone nearby who made her feel safe. He would thank her kindly and make sure her driveway was cleared when it rained. People like her reminded him of what he fought for, the simple right to live quietly without fear. There were still nights when sleep didn't come easy. Some sounds, a sudden bang, a helicopter far away, would pull him back to memories he'd rather forget. The smell of burning, the shouts of men, the silence that followed. On those nights, the dog would rest its head on his leg as if to say, "You're home now. It's over." That was usually enough to bring him back. He tried to live without bitterness. He knew the world wasn't perfect, and not everyone understood the price that peace cost. He never expected recognition or thanks. All he wanted was space, a place where he could breathe, think, and move without fear. To the casual observer, his days looked uneventful. Wake up early, train, drink coffee, play with the dog, fix something around the yard, read a bit, then rest. But beneath that simple routine was a life built on purpose. Every move had intention. Every silence had meaning. The locals sometimes saw him out on the road running with his dog beside him, both moving in perfect rhythm. Drivers would slow down, watching the pair with curiosity. There was something captivating about them, like they belonged to a different time. One morning, a teenager from the next neighborhood stopped to ask him if he had been in the military. The man smiled softly and said, "Something like that." Then he gave the boy a few quick tips about discipline, focus, and how small habits can build strength. The boy never forgot that conversation. In truth, he missed the brotherhood more than the action. The military had given him purpose, but also left him with invisible scars. The transition to a quiet life hadn't been easy, but he made it work because he had no other choice. The dog became his anchor, his reminder of loyalty and protection. Every weekend, he and his dog would drive out to a lake not far from town. They would walk along the shore, skipping stones and sitting under tall trees. Those moments felt sacred. The world was quiet there, and he could finally let his guard down. The dog would chase sticks into the water and return proudly, tail wagging. Watching that simple joy made him smile in a way nothing else could. He avoided trouble. He kept his property neat, paid his taxes on time, and treated people kindly. To most, he was the kind of neighbor anyone would want. Respectful, quiet, dependable. He had learned long ago that strength wasn't just about fighting, it was about knowing when not to. Sometimes when he looked in the mirror, he hardly recognized himself. The man staring back wasn't the same one who had once carried out missions across the world. The lines on his face told stories he'd never speak aloud. But there was a peace in his eyes, a peace he had earned. What he didn't know was that his peaceful world was fragile, like glass. He had spent years building a life away from chaos, but the world had a way of intruding when you least expected it. That morning started no differently from any other. The sun was just beginning to rise, spreading soft light over the treetops. He stepped outside, the air cool and quiet, the dog at his side. Birds chirped faintly in the distance. He began his warm-up routine, feeling the steady rhythm of his breath. To anyone watching, it was just another peaceful day. But fate, as always, had a way of turning peace into conflict. Far down the road, someone was making a call, a small misunderstanding that would soon spiral into something much larger. The man had no idea that his quiet life, the one he had worked so hard to protect, was about to collide with a world that didn't see him for who he was, only for what they assumed. And as he finished his final set of push-ups, wiping the sweat from his brow, his dog trotted up beside him, tail wagging, unaware that the day ahead would change everything. For now, though, the world was still calm. The air smelled of pine, the sky glowed soft gold, and the man smiled at the sight of his loyal friend. Peace, for the moment, was still his. The morning air was calm, filled with the smell of wet grass and the sound of birds calling from the woods. He stretched his arms, letting the cool air settle on his skin. It was another ordinary day, or so he thought. His dog stayed close, pacing lightly, waiting for the next signal. The man smiled and tossed a stick into the yard. The dog leapt after it, full of life. For him, these small moments were what peace felt like: quiet, simple, and earned. He didn't know that just a few streets away, someone was dialing 911. The caller's voice was nervous, describing what they thought they saw: a man in dark clothes, acting strange, possibly armed, doing something suspicious. The words piled up quickly, and even though the caller wasn't sure, the tone carried enough fear to make it sound urgent. The operator, following protocol, sent the information to local officers. No one paused to think that maybe it was a misunderstanding. Out in the yard, the man had no idea any of this was happening. He continued his workout, moving through push-ups, squats, and sprints with quiet focus. His dog circled him, alert but relaxed, like it always was. The man had trained it well. Never aggressive unless told, always obedient, always watching. He had no reason to expect visitors. His life was steady, predictable. The last thing he expected was to see flashing lights coming down his narrow road. The sound reached him first: tires crunching on gravel, engines idling low, radios crackling faintly. His brow furrowed. He stood upright, wiping his hands on his shirt, watching through the trees as 2 police cars slowed near his fence. His first thought was that maybe there had been an accident nearby. He glanced at his dog, who tilted its head, ears perked up. The vehicle stopped and 2 uniformed officers stepped out. They looked cautious, scanning the property as if expecting trouble. The man stayed still for a moment, trying to understand what was happening. He wasn't a stranger to tension. He'd lived through far worse, but something about this felt off. He walked toward the fence, slowly, hands visible, calm but firm in his steps. "Morning," he called out, his voice even. The officers didn't answer right away. They looked at each other, then at him. One of them placed a hand near his holster, not drawing his weapon but close enough to signal caution. "Sir, can you step away from the dog?" one officer called. He frowned slightly but kept his tone polite. "He's fine," he said. "He won't hurt anyone." "Sir, please," the officer repeated, this time louder. The dog, sensing the shift in tone, stood closer to its owner, muscles tensed but still silent. The man gave a quick hand signal, a quiet command that meant stay. The dog obeyed instantly. "What's this about?" the man asked. "Got a call," the officer said. "Someone reported suspicious activity. Said there might be a weapon involved." The man exhaled through his nose, half amused, half frustrated. "I'm exercising," he said calmly. "That's all. Just training." The officers looked at each other again. One radioed something in. The other took a step closer. "Do you have any weapons on you right now, sir?" "No," he said simply. "Not now. I'm on my property." The tension in the air grew thicker, though nothing had actually happened yet. The man could tell from their eyes that they didn't fully believe him. He wasn't angry. He was used to people not understanding him. But he could sense how quickly a situation like this could go wrong. Years of training had taught him that sometimes fear moves faster than truth. He decided to keep his voice steady, his movements slow. "You're welcome to look around if you need to," he said. "I've got nothing to hide." But before the officers could respond, the dog barked, a deep, sharp sound that came from pure instinct. A squirrel had darted across the yard, and the sudden movement triggered the dog's protective alert. The bark echoed louder than he expected in the quiet morning. The officers startled. One of them took a quick step back, hand tightening near his holster. "It's okay," the man said quickly, raising a hand. "He's trained. He's not aggressive." The dog stopped barking, responding immediately to the signal. But the officers were tense now, nerves running high. They weren't from this neighborhood. They didn't know him, didn't know his dog, didn't know that every move he made was deliberate and calm. He could see the misunderstanding growing, like a small spark that could turn into fire if no one stopped it. He kept his distance, speaking clearly. "Officers, please," he said. "There's no threat here." One of them lowered his voice into the radio again, calling for backup just in case. The man took a deep breath. He knew this script. He had seen it before in other places with worse outcomes. His mind started scanning for the safest way to end this without anyone getting hurt. He remembered his training. Control the tempo, control the tone. His dog stayed close, looking up at him, sensing his unease. He gave another quiet command, "Sit." The dog obeyed instantly, sitting perfectly still. The silence stretched for a few seconds. The man could hear his own heartbeat, the soft rustle of wind in the trees and the faint static of police radios. The world seemed to slow down. Then from the other direction, another vehicle appeared, a white SUV. It was the sheriff's deputy, arriving after the backup call. The deputy stepped out quickly, assessing the scene. 3 officers now stood near the gate, watching the man like they were expecting something bad to happen. "Sir, can you keep your hands where we can see them?" the deputy said. He lifted his hands calmly. "They're right here," he said. "I'm not armed." The dog stayed seated, still quiet. The man's patience was beginning to wear thin, but he refused to show it. Losing his temper would only make things worse. He tried to explain again, carefully. "I'm a retired serviceman. I train in my yard every morning. Maybe someone saw me through the trees and got the wrong idea. That's all." The deputy nodded slowly, still cautious. "We just need to make sure everything's okay," he said. "That's fine," the man replied. "I get it." He could tell they were trying to follow procedure. He didn't hate them for that. But what struck him was how little trust existed between them. Every word, every movement was treated like a potential threat. He had spent his life building discipline to stay calm in chaos, but he wondered how many others would have panicked in his place. The minutes dragged on. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the yard. Neighbors had started peeking from their porches, curious about the flashing lights. The man felt exposed, like his quiet world had suddenly become a stage. Finally, one of the officers relaxed slightly. "All right," he said, lowering his voice. "Maybe it was a false alarm." The deputy nodded in agreement. "Looks that way." The man let out a slow breath, trying to ease the tension in his shoulders. He wanted to say something, maybe a reminder that not every dark-skinned man doing push-ups in his yard was a threat. But he kept it to himself. He knew words like that wouldn't change much today. He crouched down and gave his dog a gentle pat. "Good boy," he whispered. The animal's ears flicked back, eyes softening. The officers began to back away toward their vehicles. The man stood quietly, hands at his sides, waiting for them to leave. He didn't wave. He didn't smile. He just wanted the moment to pass. Before they drove off, the deputy offered a polite nod. "Sorry for the trouble, sir," he said. "It happens," the man replied quietly. And with that, the engine started again. The vehicles turned slowly down the road and disappeared behind the trees. The sound of gravel faded and the stillness returned. He stood there for a long moment, listening to the silence. The dog leaned against his leg, tail moving slowly. Inside, though, his calm was cracked. He couldn't shake the feeling that something about the whole encounter had been off. The fear he saw in the officer's eyes wasn't new to him. He had seen that same look in other countries, in moments when people made choices out of panic instead of reason. He never thought he'd see it directed at him in his own yard. He walked back to the porch, sat down in his chair, and poured himself another cup of coffee. His hands were steady, but his mind wasn't. The thought kept looping through his head, how quickly things could have gone wrong. A dog bark, a sudden movement, a misunderstanding. That was all it took. He looked at his dog and smiled faintly. "You did good," he said softly. "Real good." The animal wagged its tail, unaware of how close the day had come to turning into something else entirely. As the morning went on, the neighborhood returned to its usual rhythm. Cars passed by, children played down the street, and the world moved on like nothing had happened. But for him, the peace he had built now felt thinner, more fragile. He told himself to let it go, that it was just a mix-up. But deep down, a small voice whispered that the world still didn't see him the way he really was. He brushed the thought aside and stood up. ready to finish his training. The best way to quiet the noise in his mind, he had learned, was through movement. Steady, controlled, deliberate. As he began another round of exercises, the dog followed close, eyes bright again. For now the world was calm, and the sun was warm against his back. But in the back of his mind, he couldn't shake the memory of the flashing lights, the hands near holsters, the questions that felt more like warnings. He hoped it was over. He hoped it would never happen again. He didn't know that this morning was only the beginning, that the misunderstanding wasn't as forgotten as it seemed, and that the peace he loved so much was about to be tested in ways he never imagined. For now, though, he took a deep breath, looked at the open sky and whispered to himself, "Just another day." The dog barked once as if in agreement, and together they carried on, unaware that the quiet they cherished was only the calm before the storm. The next morning started like all the others, but something in the air felt different. The man could sense it the moment he stepped outside. The world seemed quieter than usual, almost too still. The birds that usually filled the trees with sound were silent. His dog walked beside him, alert and watchful, its head turning at every faint noise. He tried to shake off the feeling. Maybe it was just the weight of yesterday's visit from the officers still sitting in his mind. He didn't want to carry that into a new day. He'd always believed that each morning was a clean start, a chance to reset, to begin again. But even as he stretched and began his warm-up, he couldn't ignore the thought that maybe, just maybe, something about the situation wasn't really over. A few minutes later, he saw it. A car parked farther down the road, one he didn't recognize. It wasn't the kind of vehicle that belonged to anyone on this street. The windows were tinted and it hadn't been there before. It sat quietly, engine off, like someone was watching. He frowned, pausing mid-stretch. His instincts kicked in without him meaning to. Years of training had taught him to notice small details, things most people would overlook. He watched for a moment, his breathing steady. Then he decided to ignore it. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe a delivery truck had stopped, or someone was using the road as a rest spot. He didn't want to assume the worst. He continued his exercises, trying to focus on his breathing. The dog trotted beside him, keeping close as always. The morning light filtered through the trees, and for a moment it felt peaceful again. But deep down his guard was up. Not long after, the sound of tires crunching on gravel broke the quiet. Another car, this one familiar. It was the same sheriff's deputy from the day before. The vehicle stopped near the fence, and the man could see the deputy step out, moving with that same cautious energy as before. The man straightened up, wiping his hands on his shirt. He wasn't angry, just tired of the tension. "Morning," he said, his voice calm. "Morning," the deputy replied. "Mind if I have a word?" He nodded and walked a few steps closer, stopping at a safe distance. The dog followed but stayed a few paces behind, sitting down on command. "Got another call this morning," the deputy said carefully. "Same description. Someone said there was yelling, maybe a disturbance." The man blinked. "There's no disturbance," he said plainly. "Just me and him, we train. That's all." "I figured as much," the deputy said. "But I had to come check. You know how it goes." "I do," the man said quietly. "Too well." The deputy gave a small nod, almost sympathetic. "I don't mean to bother you. Some folks around here just get jumpy when they don't understand something." "I get it," the man replied. "People see what they want to see." The deputy looked around for a moment, hands resting on his belt. "You seem like you've got things under control here. I'll make a note that it's nothing serious. Hopefully this will stop the calls." "Appreciate that," the man said. The two men stood there in silence for a few seconds. The deputy looked like he wanted to say more but didn't. Finally, he gave a small nod, climbed back into his car, and drove off. The man watched the vehicle disappear down the road, then turned to his dog and sighed. "Guess some folks still don't get it," he murmured. The dog wagged its tail and nuzzled his leg as if to say, "Let it go." He tried to move on with his morning, but the peace he'd worked so hard to build was slipping through his fingers. He couldn't shake the thought that his life, once invisible to the world, was now being watched. He didn't like that feeling. He had lived too long in places where being watched meant danger. Around noon, he went into town for groceries. Normally, he enjoyed the drive. Open roads, soft music, quiet thoughts. But today, even the drive felt different. People seemed to glance a little longer when he passed by. Maybe it was his imagination, Or maybe word had spread faster than he realized. At the store, the usual cashier greeted him with a polite smile. "Morning," she said. "Heard there was some kind of police thing near your place yesterday. Everything okay?" He paused for a second before answering. "Yeah, just a misunderstanding." She nodded, her face kind. "This town gets jumpy over nothing sometimes. I wouldn't worry about it." "Thanks," he said softly. He finished his shopping quickly, wanting to get back home. The drive felt longer on the way back. The same car he'd noticed earlier, the one with tinted windows, was gone, but he couldn't shake the image of it from his mind. When he got home, he took his dog for a walk through the woods behind the house. It was their favorite place, quiet, shaded, full of the smell of pine and earth. The dog ran ahead, chasing scents while he followed with a steady pace. The woods had always been a refuge for him. No one to judge, no one to misunderstand. He sat on a fallen tree for a while, tossing sticks for the dog to fetch. For the first time in days, he felt the tightness in his chest start to ease. He told himself that once a few days passed, people would forget about the whole thing. The world had short memories. Things moved on quickly, but peace didn't last long. Later that afternoon, as he sat on his porch drinking water, a car engine roared up the road again. This time it wasn't just one vehicle, there were several. The sound was unmistakable. He looked up, brow furrowed, as 3 cars came into view. One was a marked police vehicle, the other 2 unmarked but familiar in their posture. The kind of stance that spoke of authority. His stomach tightened. He stood up slowly. The dog barked once, sharp and alert. He raised a hand to quiet it. The vehicle stopped outside the gate. A few men stepped out, not the same officers from before. They wore plain clothes but carried the kind of confidence that told him they were not ordinary patrolmen. Their eyes scanned the property like they were assessing every possible angle. The man didn't move closer this time. He waited. He had learned that silence could say more than words when things didn't feel right. One of the men stepped forward, flashing a badge briefly. "Afternoon," he said. "We're following up on an incident from yesterday. Just need to clear up a few details." The man nodded. "All right," he said cautiously. "But I already spoke with the deputy this morning. He said it was handled." "I understand," the man in plain clothes replied. "But we'd like to confirm a few things." The dog barked again, sensing the unease. The sound echoed deep and strong. One of the men flinched. "It's okay," the man said softly. "He's just protective. Can you secure him, please?" One of them asked, trying to keep his tone polite. He hesitated. "He's fine where he is," he said. "He's trained." "I'd feel better if you could put him inside," the man said again. He studied their faces for a moment, then nodded. "All right." He gave a hand signal, and the dog obeyed instantly, moving toward the porch. He opened the door, letting the dog inside. For a second, everything seemed calm again. The plainclothes officers looked more at ease now that the animal was away. "All right," the man said. "What do you need from me?" They began asking questions. About the report. About the supposed yelling. About whether he had been carrying anything that looked like a weapon. He answered everything calmly, directly, without anger. He knew that staying calm was the only way to end this quickly. After a few minutes, the men seemed satisfied. One of them thanked him for his time. They turned to leave, and for a moment it looked like the situation was over again. Another misunderstanding cleared up. But as they walked back toward their cars, one of them stopped and pointed toward the porch. "Is that the same dog?" he asked suddenly. The man turned. The dog had pushed open the screen door and stepped outside again, tail wagging. Thinking the visit was friendly, he started to call out, a firm command for the dog to stay, but the sudden movement made one of the men jump. The plainclothes officer turned sharply, startled by the sound. The man's hand froze midair. His voice caught in his throat. For a second, everything stopped, no sound, no movement. Just the weight of misunderstanding hanging heavy in the air. Then, just as quickly, one of the men raised his hand. "It's fine," he said firmly, realizing there was no threat. "It's okay." The tension broke, fragile as glass. The man let out a slow breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He walked over, knelt, and gave the dog a gentle pat on the head. "Easy," he whispered. The officers exchanged uneasy glances, embarrassed at their own overreaction. "Sorry," one of them said. "Didn't mean to startle anyone." "It's all right," the man replied softly. "Happens." They left a few minutes later. The man stood on the porch long after the cars disappeared down the road. His heart was still pounding. Not from fear, but from something deeper. Exhaustion, maybe. Or disbelief at how quickly people could mistake calm for danger. The dog leaned against his leg, tail brushing lightly against his knee. He looked down at it and smiled faintly. "You and me," he said quietly. "Always misunderstood." That night he couldn't sleep. He sat outside long after dark, listening to the hum of crickets and the faint rustle of wind through the trees. He thought about how easily things could have gone wrong, how one frightened reaction could have changed everything. He didn't feel angry toward anyone, just sad. Sad that fear still ruled so many moments, that people were quicker to assume danger than to ask questions. He closed his eyes and took a slow breath. "Tomorrow will be better," he whispered. "It has to be." The dog lay beside him, head resting on his boot, both of them quiet under the stars. The night felt heavy, but at least for now they were safe. Days passed after the last visit, but the feeling of calm didn't return. The man tried to fall back into his old rhythm, yet every sound outside his window now made him pause. The world that once felt peaceful suddenly seemed filled with eyes. He didn't like that change, but he also didn't know how to undo it. He told himself it was over. The officers had left, and surely there wouldn't be more confusion. But people in a small town talk, and when stories travel from one porch to another, details change. Some said the police were called because there was danger. Others said he was hiding something. None of it was true, yet rumor has a way of becoming louder than truth. The man noticed small differences when he went into town. The grocery clerk still smiled, but it felt a little more careful. Neighbors waved, but their hands lingered in the air as if they weren't sure. Once, he overheard two men near the post office whispering about that guy up on the hill. He pretended not to hear. He wasn't angry. Mostly he was disappointed. He had worked so hard to build a quiet life, one free from judgment, and it was slipping away because of a misunderstanding. But he reminded himself that anger never solves anything. He had seen too many people lose control over pride. Peace, he knew, was something you had to protect, even when others made it hard. Every morning he still trained with his dog. The routine helped him breathe, helped him feel normal. The animal never changed, loyal, steady, happy just to run beside him. That constancy was a gift. While the world outside grew noisy with gossip, his dog remained the one thing he could count on. One afternoon, while he was fixing a loose gate post, a reporter showed up at the edge of his driveway. She was young, polite, holding a notebook. She smiled nervously when he noticed her. "Sir," she said softly, "I'm from the local paper. I heard there was some confusion with law enforcement out here last week. Do you mind if I ask a few questions?" He studied her face for a moment. She didn't look like she wanted to cause trouble, just to understand. He sighed and nodded. "I'll give you a few minutes," he said. They stood under the shade of the trees while she took notes. He told her the story simply. No drama, no blame. "It was a misunderstanding," he said. "People saw something they didn't understand. That's all." "Do you think it was about fear?" she asked quietly. He thought for a moment before answering. "Most things are when you look close enough." She wrote that down, thanked him, and left. He didn't expect anything to come from it. But a few days later, the story ran in the paper with the headline, "Local Veteran Faces Unwarranted Police Response." He hadn't told her he was a veteran, but she must have learned it from someone in town. The article was gentle, respectful, even admiring in tone. It painted him as a quiet man who served his country and deserved better treatment. That small story changed everything again, only this time, in a different way. People started stopping him at the store to thank him for his service. Strangers dropped off letters at his gate saying they were sorry for how he'd been treated. The same neighbors who once whispered now brought him pies and kind words. It was strange how quickly opinions could swing. A week ago he was a threat. Now he was a hero. He didn't feel like either. He was just a man who wanted to be left alone to live quietly. Still, he appreciated the kindness. When the sheriff's department issued a brief statement acknowledging a miscommunication, he accepted it with grace. "We all make mistakes," he said when asked by a local TV crew. His calm voice, his refusal to show bitterness, and it all struck a chord with people. Soon, bigger news outlets picked up the story. Reporters from outside the town began calling, asking for interviews. He turned most of them down. "There's nothing to say," he told them. "It's over, but the story didn't die, it grew." On social media, people argued about what had happened. Some said it was a lesson about assumptions. Others used it as proof that respect and communication had to come first. The man didn't join those conversations. He stayed offline. The noise of the world had never brought him peace before, and he didn't expect it to start now. Still, the attention brought visitors. Old friends from the service reached out after seeing his name. They reminded him that he wasn't invisible, that people still remembered what he had done and what he stood for. That meant more to him than anything printed in a newspaper. One evening, a letter arrived in the mail with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper that read, "Respect to you, sir. You handled it with grace. The world needs more calm hearts." He folded the note carefully and placed it in a drawer. Despite the good attention, something inside him remained uneasy. Fame, even accidental, never sat well with him. He didn't want to be a symbol of anything. He just wanted his peace back. The dog stayed his constant comfort. Each day they walked the same forest path behind the house. The rhythm of their steps, the wind in the branches, the familiar sounds of nature, those were the things that grounded him. The dog never cared about stories or gossip. It only cared that its person was near. As the weeks passed, the noise began to fade again. Reporters moved on to other topics. The town grew quiet. The man hoped that life would finally return to normal. But one afternoon, the sheriff himself stopped by. He was an older man, polite and measured, carrying the weight of leadership in his posture. "Mind if I come up for a minute?" he asked. "Sure," the man replied. They sat on the porch. The sheriff took off his hat and looked him straight in the eyes. "I just wanted to say we appreciate how you handled things," the sheriff said. "It could have gone differently. You kept your cool, and I respect that." The man nodded. "Thank you," he said. "I just wanted everyone safe. That's all." The sheriff sighed. "You know, we try to train our people well, but fear makes folks see shadows. Maybe this will be a lesson for us too." "I hope so," the man said softly. They sat in silence for a while, the dog lying between them, tail brushing lazily against the porch boards. When the sheriff left, he shook the man's hand and said, "You've got more friends in this town than you think." After that day, life finally began to settle. The man found himself walking into town without the weight of stairs. People greeted him with warmth again. The old woman who baked pies for him before the trouble started came by with another one. "I'm glad everything's settled," she said, smiling. "You're a good man." He thanked her and offered to fix the loose hinge on her gate the next day. It felt good to be useful again, to be part of the quiet rhythm of the town instead of the subject of its stories. Still, some nights he sat on the porch and thought about how quickly peace could break. He wondered how many others had been through similar misunderstandings without the chance to clear their name. The thought weighed on him. He decided to do something small but meaningful. He began volunteering once a week at the community center, helping with self-discipline and safety workshops for young people. He didn't talk about his military past much, only enough to make a point. He taught them about patience, self-control, and how staying calm could save lives. At first, only a handful of teenagers showed up. But word spread that he was different, quiet, real, not the kind to lecture. He listened when they spoke. They told him about their fears, their frustrations, how they felt judged or misunderstood. He nodded and told them that calm didn't mean weakness. Sometimes peace, he said, is the hardest fight of all. The dog came with him every time. It became a symbol of trust to the kids who loved tossing balls and running in the field between lessons. Watching them laugh gave the man a kind of peace he hadn't felt in years. The town began to change in small ways too. People talked more openly about misunderstanding and fear. The sheriff organized new community meetings where officers met residents in friendly settings, barbecues, park events, local fairs. The man didn't claim credit for any of that, but he saw the difference and felt quietly proud. One evening, as the sun went down, he walked to the small hill behind his property. From there, he could see the entire town, rooftops glowing in the fading light, smoke rising from chimneys, and children playing in yards. His dog sat beside him, panting softly, eyes full of trust. He thought about how fragile peace really was. It wasn't something that appeared by chance. It had to be built, guarded, and rebuilt again when it broke. He didn't blame the officers anymore. He didn't blame the caller. Fear had spoken louder than reason that day, but forgiveness had to speak louder still. He reached down and rubbed his dog's neck. "We're okay now," he said quietly. "We made it through." The animal leaned against him, tail wagging slowly. In that simple moment, with the wind soft through the trees and the sky turning gold, the man felt something close to closure. The world hadn't changed overnight, but maybe hearts had shifted even just a little. He stood there until the light faded completely, then turned back toward his house. The porch light glowed warmly ahead. Another day had passed, calm and unbroken, and for the first time in a long while, he felt that peace wasn't something distant or fragile. It was something alive, something earned, something that could grow again even after being shaken. He walked inside, his dog following close behind, both of them ready for whatever quiet the next day would bring.